Computer, cancel alarm.
7:59 a.m. alarm stopped on upstairs office white dot.
Good morning, Barry.
Good morning.
How be you?
Doing okay for an old man. Hanging in there. Haven't fallen off the edge of the earth just yet.
Well, I think these engagements could provide some interesting pursuits for quite a while.
Yeah, I hope so. I was a little concerned that maybe we only have a group of 2 or 3 people who are going to delve into stuff.
Actually, in that co-sense making group, I have no issue with that. I have absolutely no issue with that.
Yeah. I mean, it's fine if there's like 1 or 2 people who care, but really care, that's good enough. I'd rather have people who care than an audience who's sort of, dozing off.
Right.
Not really interested.
Right. And I really am interested. I'm very curious to take various aspects of daily life, all the stuff that we hear and just let pass by and really say, does this really make sense? What is the underpinning of this? Am I really supposed to believe this? Why is this so commonly accepted without question? All those kind of questions.
Yeah, absolutely. I like to paraphrase Socrates, who famously said, the unexamined life is not worth living. I would put it, the unexamined belief is not worth adopting. And boy, do we have a lot of beliefs that haven't been examined or analyzed and would fall by the wayside as misconceptions if they were carefully analyzed.
Yeah, so much so.
But analytical thinking is a very rare kind of intelligence. I mean, most people are not very competent at analytical thinking. And I have good evidence to demonstrate that.
I think when done well, it's actually fun,
Oh, yeah, but it ain't easy. And it's easy to make mistakes in analytical thinking and not realize it. Hi, Stacy.
Hey, Stace. Yeah, well, that's why, we need people who really, really want to get there, who are able to then check and balance each other, but do it in a truth-seeking way, not in an ego-driven way,
Absolutely. There's a famous quote from Feynman about fooling yourself. The first principle is you should not fool yourself, and you're the easiest person to fool yourself. And I think that is so common that people adopt positions which are analytically untenable, but they haven't done the analysis to falsify them. And they live their life with these misconceptions and stumblings, and they don't realize that, that their beliefs are leading to practices which are unwise, unhealthy, uncreative, unproductive.
Yeah. Yeah.
And for all I know, I fall in that category too, because it's very hard to analyze.
We all do. We all have blind spots. That's why we have to check each other. That's why one of my principles in community of impact is you can't just do this on your own.
Yeah, you need peer review. And for a lot of stuff, it's hard to get peer review because there aren't very many peers out there. And it's hard to find them even if they are out there, and then to get them to spend the time, because peer review is very intellectually intensive and time consuming to do properly.
Yeah, and you got to be, able to strike through the quote unquote politeness bullshit and say,
right,
this is what happened.
And you have to plow through an enormous volume of material. People who write the most generally say the least at the end of the day. There's so-called wall of text. I've come across a few people on the internet who can post these what's called a wall of text, and it's very high in entropy and very verbose and very low in analytical rigor. And at the end of the day, you go, I don't even know what the hell they said. It was just a bunch of verbiage, but it was long, and you didn't know that until you plowed through it. You said, this is just a garbage pile. But then you don't want to say, well, this is just a garbage pile, because that's an opinion.
I do think of that as pollution, though. It's
Yeah.
like taking up space.
Yeah, yeah. And
Exactly.
especially when it's long and not even checked. Obviously not checked because it's grammatically incorrect, misspellings,
Right.
incomplete sentences, dangling phrases, pronouns that don't refer clearly to something or something else, all those, and claims which don't follow each other,
Exactly.
Those are all indications that this is just either stream of consciousness or just someone's need to just spew, versus actually trying to make a point.
Yeah. Back in the 90s, I adopted a phrase which I translated from the English version to the German version because it's funnier in German. The phrase I adopted is Vrachtwagens van Kauderwelsch, which means boxcars of gibberish in English. So you see a posting that's paragraph after paragraph after paragraph. It's undecipherable, boxcars of gibberish. But I like the sobriquet Vrachtwagens van Kauderwelsch. Kauderwelsch is actually sauerkraut, literally sauerkraut.
Well, that's hilarious.
Freight cars of sauerkraut.
So if I could just go back to what Barry was saying about peer review, it being difficult to find somebody. What isn't difficult, though, is that we could find somebody to do the peer review of ourselves, meaning our own motivations for things. Why am I saying this? I mean, that Feynman quote, when you're doing inner work, the smarter you are, the worse it is, because you can make up all sorts of rationalizations for things that you do. Yeah. So to me, that's something we really could help each other with if we were in a trusted environment, if we weren't being blamed for things, if we were recognizing that we all have pieces of that same thing, because we can't recognize what we haven't experienced.
Yep.
This is that fooling yourself part.
Right.
Yeah.
And we do things for emotional reasons, which in the long term, they maybe in the short term feel realistic or reasonable or worthwhile, but in the long term, they turn out to have been a waste of time. And you eventually, it's like climbing a ladder, a sequence of ladders, and each stage, each floor, you throw away the previous ladder because you don't need it anymore because it's sort of become pointless. But you do have this phenomenon of meandering, like the river meanders just to get from here, from a highland to the sea, but it doesn't take a direct route. It has this wanderings, these somewhat random wanderings. And I think our journeys are like that. They meander.
Well, it's based on the geography.
So our species should be called Neanderthals.
I think it is.
Homo
I'm part
Neanderthal.
Neanderthal.
Sorry, go ahead, Stacy.
I was just going to say one pattern that I see, which is really the one I try to focus in on, is that although many of us recognize that people learn best by answering the questions for themselves, many of us have a tendency to not provide that opportunity. So we're trying to teach somebody something and we're just telling them what the answer is, even though we know that that's not the way. And I'm guilty of that myself.
Yeah. That's why the Socratic dialogue is both powerful, but also kind of tedious. You really have to spend very focused attention to do the Socratic method properly. If you see some of these examples that have been published of, fragments of Socratic dialogues with Socrates and some conversation partner, they're pretty long and detailed. I mean, they could go on for half an hour or longer. But I think they do work. I think if you attend to them, you gain some insight. But it ain't an easy mountain to climb.
So may I slightly change the topic a little bit?
Yeah, please.
I want to go back to something you referenced, Barry, and I want to ask Stacy. Stacy, Barry says that there was a post that was made and then removed.
Yeah.
I don't think I saw it. Do you know what Barry's talking about?
I think so. I think so. I didn't read the whole thing. Yeah, it was the one that was requesting that other posts be removed.
Yes. Yeah.
And then briefly, I think I saw something that I'm guessing referred to that one, saying that it had been published too early before it had been edited. Is this what we're talking about?
Yeah. Yeah. Joel said it was, he misclicked and submitted it while it was still in draft. Because when I read it, I go, he hasn't identified the criteria that are being violated or the expectations. He hasn't identified the posters. So, I can make a wild guess of speculation, but there's no specifics. And I couldn't really parse it. I asked Sam, and I said, can you parse it? Sam hadn't seen it yet, and then it was gone.
So my question was it something that he wanted me to remove?
Well, at least some admin. I didn't necessarily address it. He says it's an open letter, and he didn't say who he wanted to review it, because he didn't say what he wanted reviewed or why or what the criteria were. That's why I raised it to your attention, but it was like Friday or something, and you were busy.
Hello, Heiner.
Yeah. My initial thought was that it was just an attempt to once again call attention to the kind of posts that we've already discussed here. And honestly, I just scrolled past it because I don't believe in, if you want to ask that the people that posted on their own voluntarily take it down, that's fine. But I am not for forcing somebody to take down a post that doesn't really violate any principles. It's just not in agreement.
That's what I was just curious about. Was there something egregious about that post that needed to be taken down?
No. Well, he didn't specify. Yeah, it wasn't one post. I think it was in general.
Series. You know what a core dump is, Stacy? Do you know the term core dump? Sam, I don't know. In the early days of mainframe computers, if your program failed, the computer would simply do what's called a core dump. It was literally dump all of memory, because the computer couldn't diagnose what the mistake was, and it might even be a machine error or a programmer error. So we just do something called a core dump. And core dumps were essentially impossible to parse, because it's like trying to solve a crime scene with tons and tons of random stuff. And there's a kind of phenomenon in people that if they have a mental disorder, they'll do the equivalent of a core dump. They'll just spew basically in the stream of consciousness, as Sam said, and trying to figure out, what's in there to diagnose is just an unrealistic expectation. But you get these huge volumes of just, incomprehensible stream of consciousness stuff. And you go, I don't know where this person's coming from, but I'm not going to spend the time trying to read through all this, gibberish and figure out, what the story is.
My feeling was that it was just frustration being expressed. And
Yeah. Clearly that open letter to the residents of Vancouver, British Columbia was a core dump or frustration. And the one thing in it that highlighted is that he said he had a bout of depression and he was cured of it. And I said, did you go to a clinician, and did you get a clinical diagnosis? And he declined to answer that.
I think we're talking about two different people now.
Yeah, I'm confused.
Yeah, we're not talking about Joel now.
Oh, no. We're talking about who Joel was complaining about.
I don't know that that's who Joel, I don't think that is who Joel's complaining about.
Well, that's why I couldn't parse it either, because I couldn't figure out who was the offender that Joel was referring to. I don't know.
Well, I could be taking things personally, but I noticed that Joel does tend to post comments on many of my posts, and many of them actually kind of disagree. So I was just wondering if he was referring to.
Yeah, if I had to put money on whose posts he was talking about, I'd probably say yours.
Really?
But I don't know.
You don't post that much in GCC though. You post a lot in these other 2 or 3 smaller groups.
It's what I think. It's the posts that are defamatory towards religion.
Oh, that I can, yes. That I can see, but okay, that's a plausible hypothesis, I suppose.
Yeah.
Speaking of plausible hypotheses, that video, that's what I thought you were going to talk about. That video that we just commented on.
The Schmachtenberger one, the rings in Algeria.
Yes.
Yeah.
I thought that was so well done.
Yeah.
And I'll let you describe what it was, but it was a nice exercise.
Yes.
In
Fabulous.
Working through multiple hypotheses and not jumping to conclusions, and coming from a beginner's mind, it was enjoyable for me. If I were a student watching that in high school, I would have really enjoyed taking the steps and slowing down. And even for me, the very first 3 or 4 minutes or whatever, I caught myself immediately. It turned out to be yes.
Yeah.
In the end, it turned out to be yes, but it made me take a step back. And then I thought, oh, maybe it's not going to be what I thought.
Yeah. To explain, because I'm pretty sure Sam hasn't seen it, Daniel Schmachtenberger posted a video of hello. He posted a video of an odyssey to solve an arcane mystery.
Einer, wer ist deine Freundin? Hey, your microphone is really low, at least for me. Can anybody else hear Heiner?
He said to continue with the Schmachtenberger story.
Oh. Yes, and it's slow.
So I'll continue with that, and then we can have an introduction.
Work on his mic.
So Schmachtenberger says research is very time consuming and people don't realize how much work goes into research. They gave this example. It's a wonderful example. On Google Earth, you can find very bizarre features, from these photographs from outer space. And one of the bizarre features that was discovered was in the deserts in Algeria, where no one lives, are these regularly spaced circular markings in a straight line and all identical. And the question is, what the hell are these things? So this one guy decided to do the research to try to figure it out. And he began by forming hypotheses and then asking experts who would know about those hypotheses to comment on whether or not they could be right. So the first one was, these were markings from geological exploration, seismic exploration of either water or oil, because one of the ways that you look for water or oil is you make sort of some noise over here and look for the echoes over there. And if you get the right echoes, you can deduce that there's either a layer of water. So that was the first hypothesis. And then there was another person said, these look like burial mounds, classical burial mounds from, past ages. And he went through a sequence, I think, of 4 different plausible hypotheses, and then went to the experts who know about these hypotheses. And each one of them was debunked. Every one was debunked. So finally, he decided that he's going to have to send somebody out there on the ground to look at these up close and get up close pictures. And this was like 600 kilometers from the nearest big city. So it was a trek into the desert, but they found the right people and they went out there. And the 2 things that they found when they found these circular markings is, one, they found that there were very thin metal wires coming out of them, which was unexpected. And then they found old tins of sardines and tuna that were from tin cans from previous decades, quite a long time ago. And finally, after lots and lots of research, they figured out that this was, in fact, a French company that was looking for oil. And back in those days, the way that they made the sound to get the seismic is they would plant little dynamite things, and they would detonate these dynamites, and then they would listen for the echoes. That's a technique that became obsolescent, like decades ago, and nobody even remembered it. So it turned out that they did solve the mystery, but the story about how they formed all these hypotheses and did all this research, ended up falsifying all the theories, including the one that turned out to be correct, was a very well presented story, an odyssey of solving an otherwise very arcane mystery. What are these, circular things out in the Algerian desert? And it's like it was about a 20-minute video, Stacy, I think. It's well worth 20 minutes because it's really, really well done and demonstrates what's involved in doing a good research project to solve an otherwise arcane mystery. But
so
fascinating.
Curious, in real life, how long does this actually take from the time that these rings were found versus when they actually made the final conclusion by visiting these things?
Well, the rings were first spotted in Google Earth by some people in Reddit who first raised the question, what the hell are these? And the fellow who did the video was a latecomer to this story. So the mystery was out there for quite a while before this one guy who eventually really dug into it began. And I think it was you say 2 years, Stacy, the whole Odyssey?
Oh, I wrote a few months, but maybe I'm wrong.
I think it was maybe more than a year. I didn't keep track of that, but it took a long time, at least half a year, maybe as long as 2 years from start to finish, of becoming interested in it, to interviewing, because he interviewed lots and lots of people who might have had some expertise on the different, were these water wells? There was a whole theory that these were wells that were dug to channel water. In fact, there is such a technology. It turned out that wasn't the one, but they all had enough similarity, digging wells and burial mounds, because they found some burial mounds out there, but these weren't the ones that matched the ones in the Google Earth. So they had all these, each one of these theories, there was evidence to support it, but none of them were actually correct until they finally figured out, yes, this was a French company doing a very old-fashioned seismic survey looking for oil back then, late 1950s. And the evidence there was the tin cans, the sardine and tuna cans they left behind, because these were old-fashioned cans with old-fashioned labels. And nobody realized that the dynamite method, was once used to do these seismic surveys way back, before they had machines that just pounded the earth with hydraulic pound. It was much better than setting up these dynamite circles.
So I want to get back to that story, but let's welcome Heiner's friend and Joel.
We don't hear you, Heiner. You're talking, but we don't hear you.
Yeah, your microphone appears to be off.
Yeah. You don't have the right microphone selected.
We cannot hear you.
Go to audio settings and select the right microphone that gives you the indicator of voice.
Yeah.
Oh, no, I'm hearing it.
A little bit.
We heard half a
Very
second.
weak.
Very low.
Very weak.
Is it now?
Very weak, but we can hear you.
Very little. Very little.
Okay. I switch the loudspeaker off, and in a minute.
Who was these experts that didn't know of the dynamite seismic tests?
The video, I put it in the chat. What it was a story of is just somebody who was very interested, saw something on Reddit, and it piqued their curiosity. And the video was just the process they went through of speaking to different people and narrowing things down and not jumping to conclusions. I think
they did jump to conclusions because they did.
No,
you
didn't see the video yet. But
Joel, I think I can answer Joel's question. Okay. The seismic expert that they went to was familiar with the modern methods, but the method that was used 70 years ago was so different from modern methods that the guy wasn't even familiar with it. He was familiar with modern methods of seismic surveys with machines that pounded the earth with hydraulic pounding. And this method of using dynamite way back in the 40s and 50s, so long forgotten that this expert had to go back and look it up because he had never studied this antiquated method of using dynamite.
Well, that's what's perplexing me. I did know of that method.
Well, that's interesting.
Because I studied a lot of 17th and 18th century engineering. And so that method of seismological testing was obvious.
Yeah. And the guy who did the video went to a modern expert.
I'm surprised the modern expert didn't know. I would have thought that as a seismologist, he would have studied relatively recent engineering practice.
Possibly. You can watch the video and try to resolve that for yourself, but...
Please add the video. Can you hear me now?
That's
yes.
Better.
Yes, very clearly.
Well, you see, I was in that field, seismology, sonar, any kind of hypersensorial exploration. So I would have had the same idea, but I found the story very interesting. So please send the video.
I put it in the chat already. It's in the chat.
Okay. Well, I just came in. We have to have a bite. We are really behind everything. It's now my 9th day in Stockholm. I came for this 50 years Stockholm Peace Environment UN thing. And I'm here with an old friend. Her name is Elizabeth. And we just had a little walk and a little shopping and talking. And I'm very late in many things as I fly out tomorrow and have to write some reports. And it was very exhausting to really coordinate with Jörg in Bali to really get our activities going for the next thing in Sharm el-Sheikh, Conference of the Party Climate Summit. So Elizabeth is a globetrotter like me. She has been around the globe, around museums. I think she knows the Nobel Library here in Stockholm. And I met her first 25 or whatever years ago in Berlin. And we have friends. And she just came to visit me. I'm here in an Airbnb and have to also do the dishes and we do the cooking. But Elizabeth, you want to say something, who you are?
Well, I don't know what to say, but we are old friends from long time ago. So it was great.
And your field? What is your field?
I have no particular field.
So she's like me.
So is Elizabeth. Where is home?
I studied languages and well.
Anthropology?
So, yes, a little bit. Ethnography in Swedish.
And arts and sciences in the world.
Right, yeah.
I've got an interesting question for you. Have you studied any of the languages that use synesthetic perception? So like Sanskrit and a few of the other languages all related to that language line. The characters and a few of the words were derived by people who had synesthesia. And so the practice that is used in Western culture to use abstract meaning doesn't quite work out the same. So to those people, the words had the meaning because the image they perceived through the synesthetic perception was directly related to the meaning they gave the word.
No, I have not studied Indian language. I have studied German and Russian. And a little bit of French and English, of course.
But Joel, this is my field. It's hyperspectral and synesthetic in many languages and cultures and writing systems and expression systems. But I just wanted to have a look of who is in the room because I only had a little bite this morning. That's long ago. So I just wanted to introduce Elizabeth, what I'm doing here, besides my other issues. And maybe one day she will also go to Zoom. So we are really here in an embryonic phase of video conferencing. So this was our part. Who is next?
So Elizabeth, is Stockholm your home?
Yes.
Do you know Nora Bateson? Because I think she lives in Stockholm.
We are both friends with Nora.
Ah, yeah. She's fabulous.
You muted yourself.
And Heiner, what is the subject
Okay,
of
we
this?
are hearing you. We are hearing you, but we first have to get a bite.
Heiner,
And
10 seconds. 10
I
seconds,
also
Heiner.
have to drop out.
10 seconds, Heiner. 10 seconds.
Yes.
What is the
Yes.
subject of the report you're actually writing?
Well, I've been nearly 10 days in Stockholm. We had all these UN conferences, 50 years Stockholm. We're preparing 30 years Rio with Mahendra and Jörg. And all this is really like, after the virus, really, again, a caravan of one thing after the other. So follow me up on LinkedIn, but I will probably also do some more on Medium.
Okay, thanks. And thanks
It's
for
called
introducing
Stockholm Plus 50. You might have seen it in television. All the big potatoes and presidents were there, except Putin.
The big potatoes. I never heard that before.
You know, Stephen Colbert's running joke?
No.
Every time he talks about Russia, his closing line is always, "It's potato."
It's potato.
I haven't watched him in a while.
Yeah. Okay. Shall we move on to another topic?
Sure.
I was curious, you mentioned, and now that Joel is here, can I ask about the post that was posted and then removed? I didn't actually see it, so Barry referenced it.
That's
Joel?
to you, Joel.
Joel?
Oh,
He's asking about the post.
the one I accidentally sent and didn't realize. I was still drafting it, and then I woke up this morning to find comments on it. I was typing it out, and with Facebook, I type out a lot of messages, and then they suddenly disappear, and I've lost the whole message. So I thought that had happened, not realizing that I'd accidentally sent the message. But basically, it was to point out the fact that there are still discriminatory posts being posted on the forum, and that it should stop, as I've asked multiple times.
Are you referring to my posts or some other posts?
Yes.
Are you referring to the posts against religion?
Yes, the ones that showed a lack of knowledge, a lack of awareness, a lack of knowledge that's been tried to be shown, and that the places where the evidence and knowledge can be obtained from. It's just round in circles. What's the point in me trying to, as you asked last time we spoke, to teach you these things if you're just going to keep doing the same behaviors? If you're going to keep alienating the people that we are trying to collaborate with?
I'm still just trying to learn. So I'm exposing all of my mistakes and all of my misconceptions. Is that not an honest way to engage?
But would you accept anyone else being discriminatory in any way you consider wrong?
Absolutely. I would consider it their right to do so.
I've seen your posts. That's not true. Because you attack religion for that very thing. You attack religion for being discriminatory whilst being discriminatory.
No, I actually think that there's a clear difference. And we discussed it last week or the week before, whichever. So I find that if there's still an interest in engagement and in learning more and getting evidence and actually discussing things rationally, I think that's perfectly normal. That's coexistence. If there isn't, if there's just this is truth and you must accept it, and oh, by the way, this is where it is, go find it, then that's not really engagement to me.
Yes, it is. You say something that's incorrect. Somebody knows that it's incorrect because they have awareness of the knowledge. They then tell you
you know that it's incorrect. Are you saying that everybody knows that it's incorrect?
Not everybody has to know. One person can know and go, this is the place you can go and get the knowledge. They don't have to put it in your hand. The bare minimum they have to do in any way is go, it's here.
Okay.
That's it.
I'll follow those trails. I will. Not maybe right away, but I will.
The post's still going to go. You keep saying that you're being rational, yet to be rational, you require knowledge, because rationalization is something done based upon knowledge and awareness. So you're not being knowledgeable, you're pushing an ideology that never had substantiated evidence.
I'm not using
Because
your
of
knowledge, perhaps.
because
I
an
agree with that.
authority figure said words that agreed with the way people about those things. They were never correct. They were never evidential. Yet they're still said round in circles by people, even with people going, that's not the idea, that's not the correct idea. Why are you still using the correct idea to judge something from?
So you're using your word to criticize what I post. And if we reflexively flip it around, and if I do the same thing, would you accept that?
Provide the place for the knowledge.
I do. I post a lot of stuff based on science and based on rational thought.
It's not rational to be lacking knowledge and awareness and to think agreeing.
Yes, according to you, it's not. According to you, it's not.
Rationality is based upon knowledge and awareness. You can't be rational without knowledge and awareness. If someone is telling you you're lacking knowledge, you are not being rational with that knowledge. That is physics.
Do you understand that is your opinion?
It's not an opinion. Physics
is not
beyond opinion.
How is it not an opinion?
Because the physics of knowledge is processes going on in a brain.
So define the physics of knowledge then.
The physics of knowledge is related to linguistic things existing and to understandings of dimensional and force relations.
See, that's you're using a lot of words that I haven't heard you define.
We're talking English and we can't define every single word.
No, English is a general
You're a scientist,
platform.
so you should know what dimensions are.
Dimensions, I understand. Not the way that you use that word.
You should know what linguistics are. Yes?
You're using the word dimension in a way that I'm not familiar with.
What is a dimension?
It's actually a frame of reference, for a perspective.
And in geometry, what is a dimension?
It's an orthogonal direction from the other axes.
Right?
Yes.
So what is everything in existence, including language, including speech?
I mean, these are leading questions. I mean, there's a big way to
Yes, because
explore.
I'm getting you to be rational.
Okay.
I'm leading you to rational thought.
So if you're saying what is everything, I mean, how does one answer that?
Using science's knowledge.
All I'm saying is you
sound?
can do this, we can have a conversation, but you're actually being quite condescending. You're actually saying, I have only knowledge that's relevant.
You're considering me condescending, whereas I'm just leading you to questions to give you the chance to be rational.
I am asking questions. And
I've given you questions to lead to answers. So what is sound?
Barry?
Yeah, Sam knows this. I'm not sure Joel's followed. I pointed out more than one occasion that there's a chasm between theology and religion. The theology and religion are not synonyms. In fact, they're often poles apart. Sam tends to criticize religion, but I don't see him criticizing theology. And in particular, we've been discussing something called analytic theology, which is rational thinking about the same kinds of issues that classical theologians think about. But that's very distinct from religion, which is the practices that are adopted by the general population based on an incomplete understanding of the theology. And analytic theology is expressly rational thinking without no faith involved, no beliefs adopted on faith in analytic theology. But analytic theology is extremely uncommon. Even a lot of people who study theology have never heard of analytic theology or never looked into it.
What do you do when you're teaching a high level thing to lower level perception and understanding people?
You generally do what Umberto Eco pointed out in a famous quote. Umberto Eco says, wherever we cannot express a theory, we must tell a story instead. And the classical theologians were not the only people who adopted that practice, but even in science journalism, where the theory is full of arcane mathematics, the science journalist will tell a story. They'll use metaphors and analogies and other ways of narrating. They'll turn it into a narrative, which tries to convey the idea of the theory, but typically it falls short in problematic ways. And almost any narrative that tries to explain a theory without using the mathematics or the logical analysis, you can reach a 95% audience, but they won't really understand the theory. They'll have a different impression of the theory than the theoreticians have, who are using the language of mathematics and analysis. Very few people are any good at analysis. I mean,
so if you're trying to get a group of people to understand that science says these behaviors will lead to evolutionary negative consequences for both society and our biology, what would you have to create? The religious form of the theological knowledge. You have no choice.
Science doesn't lead you to that at all. How do you even make that claim?
Because
science is a...
That's why we have science.
No, see, I
absolutely no science.
I will claim that here you're in a category error. Okay, the claim of a system of thought that is a way of querying and interrogating the universe is not in itself going to lead you to whatever it is that you claimed it does. Okay, now the people who misapply it could be misapplying that particular method. But a system of thought, a system of interrogating the universe, that's just a method.
There are many people who try to build an item of technology based on their understanding of a scientific principle, but they don't really understand the scientific principle. And so they try to build a piece of technology that in fact can never be reduced to practice. So what happens in technology is the ones who have the scientific theory correct and the engineering correct will build a product that really works. It'll go on the market and people will become familiar with the product without understanding the science and the engineering and the mathematics that goes into it. And the ones who try to build things which cannot be reduced to practice, the general public just never sees them. They become science fiction or imaginations or fantasies. And a lot of stuff that's fantasy does not get converted into reality. A few things do. So some of the things that some science fiction writers imagined decades or centuries ago did come to pass centuries or decades later because their ideas were not infeasible or violated any fundamental laws of nature. But you have this phenomenon that people try to build, perpetual motion machines and all that kind of nonsense. And you can still see, you go on the internet or on YouTube, you can see lots of people trying to demonstrate things which can in fact not be reduced to practice because their understanding of the science is incorrect or their claims about what the science says is incorrect.
May I add one more point?
Please.
I think you can correctly say that maybe there's a non-application of systemic thinking. You could correctly claim that, in my opinion. You could also claim you're not actually doing proper extrapolation based on phenomena that you do see and that you do understand. But that's not science leading you into any of this, malpractice. I think that's an interesting claim.
Yeah.
People make a lot of interesting claims surrounding science, which isn't actually science. They're just abstracted, supposedly rational statements that pander to an emotional, ideological perspective.
Yeah, wishful thinking.
And then they're agreed upon en masse and repeated endlessly, which is a lot of the memes you post.
There's no shortage of wishful thinking.
No understanding of the thing they're judging, just agreed upon statements that are attacking other people for doing the same thing that is being
I will admit to being shallow. That's fine. But is that grounds for removing
You're more than welcome to continue posting these memes on your personal page. That's your, as you say, you're right. But I've asked it be stopped in GCC specifically for the reason that this is meant to be a collaborative place to bring in people of different ideas. And that behavior is contrary to that.
Right, Sam, you go first.
That might be true if we had an agreement on that. but there hasn't been an agreement on that. So we each do what we want to do. And that's been, something I've hoped that we could actually reach is some set of agreements. But in absence of that, well, all I'm trying to do is pursue that which I believe to be rational and true, just as you do. And I'm not advocating for you to take your posts down. So I'm just thinking, hey, why do you feel you have to impose your values on others when you're actually trying to say, hey, let's be collaborative?
I believe I've shared very few memes.
Yeah, but you comment a lot. You comment and criticize a lot.
Yes, for this same very thing.
And it's all fine, right? I welcome that. But you don't seem to welcome it.
Because this is meant to be somewhere for collaboration, and its behaviors
according to you.
Against
yes.
Global challenges community.
Yeah, we're trying to find out what that means. We've been looking for an agreement on these terms and definitions, and for years, we've still been going round and round.
Okay, one of the challenges, get people to stop saying things that causes anti-collaboration. It's a very good challenge.
Okay, I can consider that. Are you willing to consider that applied to you?
You could have said a while ago that I was being condescending, whereas that wasn't condescending. You just assumed it was.
No, these are all just words. Don't get wrapped in words.
Have defined meanings.
Yes, they do, but they also have additional nuances in context.
So endlessly, what we're really going to do is go around semantics, rather than stick to the more generalized understanding of what these words mean.
Sticking to generalized understandings is an assumption that you could make, and I would say probably in some cases ill-advisedly.
We're just going to endlessly go around in circles then.
Yep. I think that's a good prediction. I think that's a valid prediction.
Right.
But
Whereas
going around in circles and not ascending out of the spiral, but maybe
if you make those assumptions, now what I've been trying to do is say, let's clarify that when we each individually use certain terms, we could individually be bringing different implications and nuances and meanings to that. That's one thing I've been actually trying to propose. That is recognized by a few, but not all. Stacy's got her hand up.
Trying to think where to start. I mean, for me, the most difficult people to collaborate are the ones that think that I have to think exactly like them.
Exactly.
And that goes for even people that I might agree with, but when they have that attitude, that's an issue for me. And for my limited knowledge of religions or whatever you want to call it, I always get the message that the answer is to go within. So if I can't be comfortable because of my surroundings, of the people I'm working with, that's on me first. So I just wanted to say that, because this going back and forth is not really looking at what the problem is, so, and I've been in the place where I've looked to what's wrong and why don't they see this, and all those things, and I recognize what that feels like, but I think that's something we have to resist the urge to do, and instead look at the part that we're meant to learn, because there's something in it for us in every situation. It's not just all about we're here to teach other people. They're here to teach us something as well.
Right, Sam.
Barry, you go first.
Okay. Imagine you have two parties who have polar opposite positions. Each one says that their position makes sense, the other guy's position is baloney, and they agree to engage in a public debate, each one presenting their side and criticizing the other. When two people who have dissimilar perspectives participate in a public debate, is that a collaboration? Is a public debate a collaboration?
It can be.
I think so.
See, that's the interesting thing. A lot of our entertainment involves a protagonist and an antagonist. And actors who play the role of the protagonist and the antagonist are collaborating to put on a drama. Well, in real life, people who are protagonists and antagonists, not just actors, but actually that's who they are, they also put on a drama, and it draws an audience. People love to observe competition. And so when people are fighting, in a sense, that's a collaboration at the next level from the perspective of the audience. That's a collaboration. So are they collaborating or not? It really depends on from which frame of reference, from the perspective of the antagonist or from the perspective of the people in the lawn chairs with the popcorn and lemonade in the audience. So to say collaboration is really it's what frame of reference. I happen not to like debates. I don't think debates really are very good educational vehicles, but a lot of people find them entertaining nonetheless.
To add to Barry's point, in the case of, online, if we could use complete sentences and make the points so that the people watching can judge and evaluate, that would be a great start. Instead of, speaking in innuendos or, abstracts, then it's not useful. But I often let conversations go on even on my page, which sometimes it's really annoying and people wonder why I don't block somebody. But I would rather the thinking processes rise to the surface and who's ever reading it can make decisions for themselves.
There's a great expression, I don't know who gets credit for it, come let us reason together. If I were to adopt Joel's perspective, if there's something that I take great exception to that's present in a discussion like GCC, would it make sense for me to make a similar complaint and a similar request or expectation that it be taken down? And I have very mixed feelings about that. Sometimes I would like stuff taken down simply because it's defamatory and harmful. Other times I think, well, no, this is not a bad way to argue out or discuss out or reason together on something. And so I'm not a big fan of taking stuff down, except if it's extreme. If it's really, really extreme, really harmful, really dangerous, yeah, then censor it. But I'm not a big fan of censoring just on, I personally object to it, because plenty of people personally object to me. And I go, what the hell's your objection? I'm just doing science. Oh, but when you do science, it makes other people feel bad. Well, it may be true. But, is that a sufficient reason not to do science or rational analysis? To deconstruct a line of reasoning and show that it's false, does that humiliate the person who proposed it? Well, maybe for some people. But if you're a scientist, you welcome that. If you're a politician, you don't.
Exactly. Not only that, the history says, okay, if I was wrong in the past and I've actually learned now, isn't that forward progress? It's being honest.
Yeah.
So in the future, I hope to be more enlightened. I hope to then show more understanding of the truth and the knowledge and the wisdom that Joel has. But at the moment, I don't. So I'm asking questions. And so that trail of where I used to think, what I think now, etc., that's a reasonable trail. That's an honest trail.
Gregory Bateson actually took a look at this phenomenon, and he coined a term, and you've probably heard of it, schismogenesis. Schismogenesis is when you have people who are poles apart and they can't reason together and resolve it. And so they simply go their separate ways and they form separate cults. And one of the things that may be happening in GCC is that people are departing, going there, just saying, I've had enough of this. I'm not learning anything here. This is just people, yelling at each other. And so some people stay in the fight game longer than others because they're enjoying the fight. Other people say, this isn't my cup of tea. But that's sort of a variation of schismogenesis. And I think one of the reasons that Sam has started some other smaller groups is because of this phenomenon of schismogenesis. Let's just have a little community of interest who's interested in this one tiny little discipline, and people who are promoting their hobby horses all over the map. You got this person's hobby horse and that person's hobby horse. I go, I really don't want to pay attention to 17 hobby horses. overload, and most of them I'm not interested in. So I'll walk away, from the 3-ring circus because it's bewildering. It's not that any of the rings are bad. It's just that it's too bewildering to be present in a 17-ring circus.
May I add one note?
Go ahead.
My questions really are to try and understand. So when you, Joel, introduce terms and frames of reference and words used in different contexts that I'm familiar with, if I don't take the care to really understand the meanings that you are trying to ascribe to them, then I'm being sloppy in my thinking. And then I would not actually be understanding what it is you're saying. So the degree to which I actually ask these questions is the degree of curiosity that I'm actually trying to understand. And agree, it's even sincerity, okay? You may not believe it's sincere, but it truly is sincere. I'm very open to all of these phenomena, but I want to understand them in terms that, normal humans can understand. And normal humans understand things, that they see and experience every day, okay? Now, when there are, interesting ideas and notions and frames of reference that I can't ground to anything that I currently understand, then it takes me more time. It takes me more effort. It should be understandable that that's the case, right? I shouldn't just hear something new and just say, oh, wow, that's true. I should just accept it. That's, again, sloppy thinking. So I'm trying to figure out how to ground these new ideas that I'm hearing from you. How would you actually introduce these to other people to whom these ideas are foreign? Do they just accept it simply because you told them? Would that be something that's satisfactory to you? Will that actually indicate true understanding? Or if I really delve around it and really get curious and really, sit with it for a while and really watch those 4 videos that you posted last week, et cetera, and then come back, wouldn't you then think that I actually had, really poked at it enough so that when I say I understand, you actually might have more confidence that I do in that scenario?
Yes, but at the same time, I would also see it that if someone who you can see has some awareness is saying that the things you're posting are demonstrating the opposite of doing that you would learn from that person saying that and then stop. Because if he was trying to
just
show that
because you say
learn,
you've got some awareness?
No, because you said you want to learn.
Yes.
But what you're doing goes against that because you're just reinforcing
because you
belief.
Say so. That's the only authority I see.
Says so.
Right? That's the authority I see is because you say so.
No, I often point to the science. It's not me saying so. Go learn these things from science. Go learn these things from these scriptures and these people who are better at it than me at describing it. I'm merely acting as an arrow. I'm not always that great at explaining myself. I don't even understand when people don't understand words like dimension when they're scientifically educated. Scientifically educated people should be taking into account the meaning of dimension according to mathematics, which is related to height, length, and width. Because height, length, and width is based upon dimensional length, we then have to take into account the fact that sound waves are traveling through air and light waves are traveling through another medium, which means their dimension of interaction isn't on the same level. Different mediums, different dimensionality.
So you're introducing terms that I have trouble mapping.
Barry had his hand up. If you could jump in.
Maybe a decade ago, I posted a 3-sentence post both in Google Plus and Facebook. I'll just read it. I also put it in chat. This is from 2013. There is a convincing narrative for every belief and a convicting narrative for every infidel. Conclusion. The method of adversarial narratives is not a reliable method for arriving at the ground truth. Suggested alternative, look into the methods of system science.
Yes.
So that, you know, that was an insight that I posted at least a decade ago. And one of the things that I find tedious and boring is this phenomenon on the antisocial networks of this method of adversarial narratives. It's not a reliable method for arriving at the ground truth. It just fills up our social space with noise, pollution, or talk. What did you call it, Stacy? Pollution, I think you called it.
Pollution.
Yeah.
If I could just clear one thing up, though, Sam, correct me if I'm wrong, but Joel, I think when Sam is questioning you on a word, it's not that he doesn't have his own definition of dimension or whatever that word is, but he's trying to confirm that you both are using the same definition, because that's how lots of misunderstandings happen. People are using a word that very clearly it's going to give that definition in the dictionary, but there's going to be more than one definition there.
Right. And I'll give you an example. The way you just described sound waves and light waves is interacting in different dimensions. I'm not understanding that right now. Are you referring to the Fourier transforms? Are you referring to some other dimension other than the 3 or 4 that we're talking about? That's where I don't understand your use of the word dimension.
My impression when Joel talks about geometry, he's in a Hilbert space where every dimension has the same metric, distance. Whereas in Minkowski's space, one of the dimensions is time, doesn't have the same metric as space. And in general mathematics, if you have multiple dimensions, they typically have different metrics if they have metrics at all. Some of them don't even have metrics.
Time is a distance.
Sorry?
Time is a distance.
In some theories, yes.
A sound wave has a single length sound wave has a different length of time to a single length light wave.
But it's still a frequency or a wavelength measured in the same dimensions that we live in.
But they're fractal relationships.
How is it fractal?
Happening within a different medium to what sound is. Sound is happening on the atomic level.
How is it fractal?
Because it's different levels. You're going from an atomic level to subatomic levels.
That's not fractal. Fractal are identical structures that occur, you know, in recurring scales.
According to dimension of interaction, like the Mandelbrot set, which can be done in lots of dimensions.
Still, that's different than saying, you know, atomic scale is different from, let's say, sound scales. That's not my understanding of a fractal relationship. Is it really, Barry? I'm wondering. I could be wrong here.
I would have to think about that. I mean, the notion that dimensions are somehow interchangeable, the mathematics basically gives you the relationship between one dimension and another, even if they have different metrics. And one of the things that we do in mathematical sciences is introduce a metric for one dimension and a metric for a different dimension, and somehow show a relationship that says for you can convert, you know, one dimension into the other through this relationship, but the relationships don't have to be one-to-one.
Right. Let's give a couple other examples. If you actually take the 3 or 4 that we're talking about, we could also introduce another potential dimension, which is temperature. You could introduce another one, which is potentially color. You can introduce another one, which is potentially pressure, okay? Those could be considered orthogonal dimensions. But I don't see how frequency, which is measured in actual, you know, distances that we understand in 3D, that doesn't appear to me to be a different dimension.
Where do you think the frequency is coming from? The variance in density of energy wave formats.
Well, it's the number of reversals per unit time, but reversing in what dimension? Doesn't matter what dimension is reversing.
Exactly.
It's simply something is oscillating in some dimension at a rate, and the rate is all the frequency tells you about. Doesn't tell you anything about what this dimension represents, the thing is reversing.
Right.
I mean, if I have a blinking neon sign, you know, the other dimension is the brightness of the light or the color of the light in the neon sign.
So acoustic waves still travel in the 3 or 4 dimensions that we're talking about here.
Yeah. So dimensions can be pretty abstract. They don't have to be anything real. They can be, I mean, some parameter in a mathematical model can just be an invented parameter. It doesn't have to be anything physical. Certainly in quantum mechanics, expectations where you're going to find something. I mean, that's a prediction. That's a belief where your belief is spread out, over a distribution of possible outcomes. So,
right. So I'm looking for ways to ground my understanding of these new ideas in frames of reference and terms that I already do understand. That's all I'm trying to do. And if you say, well, that's just being in the existing frame of mind, you're not expanding your mind enough. Okay, show me how to do it differently. But it's got to be based on, terms that I understand. You can't tell a 5-year-old to understand something by just forgetting everything they already know and understanding quantum physics. They're not going to have a basis for it. So how would you introduce this in a way that's actually consumable, ingestible?
I would feel I was doing what Barry was saying earlier and bastardizing it to the point of taking it away from the understanding.
How so?
Because I don't even know how to describe a different way. If you can't say that an electron is vibrating within an atom, that's not the sound. But if you vibrate an atom and all the atoms around it, that's sound. Well, that's exactly the same with light. Light is a vibration
it's frequency,
of a media.
It's wavelength, it's phenomena, but it's not sound.
Which is vibration and density variance in a media. I'm saying light is one dimension of vibration and frequency, and sound is another dimension of vibration and frequency.
Okay, so let's say we accept that. Huh? What is the implication? What is the conclusion you draw from that I am still struggling to understand?
In what sense?
In other words, you seem to think that understanding these things as different dimensions gives you some insight that I'm still struggling to understand. What is that insight that you get from posing those as different dimensions?
It's understanding how the nature of reality works, which is science.
But reality includes ideas, and ideas
are electrical thought patterns and impulses and quantum wave functions.
They're complex patterns of thought. But I mean, here's the very issue. I have a pattern of thought in my head, and so does Stacy, and so does Sam, and so does Joel. But I can't look inside your brain and get a map of your pattern of thought. I can hear you translate it into a story, into a narrative. But what's really happening in your brain is absolutely invisible to me. I'd have to intuit it from a long narrative. And the likelihood of me getting anything out of that is nil to non-existent.
So I'm just doing an A-B scenario here. Let's take A as, okay, Barry and I perhaps, understand E&M. We understand what we learned through physics and mathematics and, cosmology, etc. So we have some understanding of atoms and molecules and vibrations and etc. B is you've got a different way of expressing it with alternate, additional dimensions. I'm just trying to say A predicts and describes certain phenomena. B will predict and describe certain other phenomena. I'm trying to say, what does B draw as a conclusion or implication from what you just said about sound and frequency and atomic vibrations, etc.? When you characterize those as different dimensions, what are those implications that you draw in B that we cannot draw in A?
As far as I'm aware, quantum field theory does describe those things as different dimensions.
How so?
That's how the mathematics is equated and how it's drawn and described in geometry.
Maybe I need to study that some more. Is that the case? I'll do some more.
Which is why I'm confused.
What dimensions are they, though? What dimensions are they?
I don't know the names of them all.
Well,
it's technically more than that.
take quantum mechanics. One of the dimensions of quanta is a phenomenon called spin. And particles can have something called spin 1/2. It actually has a metric, although it's discrete. And for the longest time I go, what the hell does the dimension and the metric spin value of 1/2? What the hell does that mean? And I spent decades, trying to come up with a mental model that could make sense of that other than simply something you'd write down on paper and ascribe to thing. And I finally came up with one thing that Joel might appreciate, but I have no idea if it's right. What you have in electron is the direction in space of the magnetic moment. Magnetic moment points some direction in space. Now you could assume perhaps that the direction in space is fixed, like a spinning top that's not precessing. It's just spinning around an axis, and that axis never changes direction. But we know that tops precess, okay? And they can not only precess, but they can also nutate. That is, the angle that they depart can also in the other direction. So now I'm trying to think, what the hell is spin 1/2? And I come up with this idea that you have two spin 1/2 particles, but one is spin up, one is spin down, and their direction in which they are pointing their magnetic moment is kind of like a figure 8 in 3 dimensions, but mirror images of each other. And if you follow this kind of band leader motion, you'll notice that for every cycle of up, down, or left, right, or front to back, one of them is at the rate of 1/2 of the others. That is, the figure 8 has, I go 2 times in one dimension while I go 1 time back and forth in the other. And so I'm thinking, maybe that's what they mean by spin 1/2, that if you look at that the precession and the nutation are in a ratio of 1 to 2, geometrically, Joel, that you can do that. You can actually geometrically make a spinning top that's flipped, that's tippy top, that's flipping upside down, reversing at one rate while it's precessing at the other rate. So you have your nutation and your precession in a ratio of 1 to 2, and the whole thing is not pointing in one fixed direction, but in some kind of a 3-dimensional figure 8. And I go, is that spin 1/2? Now, maybe the geometry is fabulous, is correct. And maybe it's just total bullshit. That's not what spin 1/2 means at all. I don't know. But that took me decades to even come up with a mental model that even potentially decoded the meaning of spin 1/2 or minus 1/2. I think it fits the evidence of the experiments, but I don't know how to demonstrate that because I can't do the experiments to. Go ahead, Sam.
May I actually express an appreciation for this conversation to you, Joel? To me, GCC is about learning how to get through misunderstandings and disagreements in a civil way. So I am really trying to understand, and I'm trying to do it civilly. Okay, you may believe that I'm not doing it civilly in posts. Perhaps you have a point, okay? But I also believe that what I'm trying to do is stimulate these kinds of conversations so that we can actually learn and hopefully, practice and get better at civil disagreement, calm, rational disagreement towards clarifying up misunderstandings and hopefully getting some kind of mutual understanding. Now, that's not necessary, but it's a hoped for outcome. So that's why I thank you for this. In my mind, squelching by saying this post must be removed is an extreme form of that. Yeah. Now, you may say that my posts are already an extreme form of that. I'm willing to consider that. But in my mind, it is really trying to get through a lot of the, I'll say it, gobbledygook that I see that's out there. Undefined terms, frames of reference that are not, well posed, conclusions that are not well made, partial phrases that aren't, full claims. That's the sloppy expression that reveals sloppy thinking. And I'm really trying to get, that at least exposed
I could
and minimized.
quickly add a slight tact onto that. It's not necessarily a demonstration of sloppy thinking, but an inability to express the thinking.
They go together. They can have both, yeah.
Or one or the other.
The sloppier the expression, or the more difficult it is to parse the narrative, the more likely that the theory itself is cocked up. But even if you have a good theory, the narrative can just be completely incomprehensible.
Right. And if you do have a good theory, it should be possible to explain the elemental foundational ideas of it.
Yeah. The Higgs boson was a good example. They tried to figure out a narrative to explain what it meant. And the narratives in the science journalism on the Higgs boson is just baloney. I mean, it does a disservice to the theory.
It's really hard to picture a Higgs boson in operation.
Yeah,
I don't think anybody's done it well. I don't even know.
No, they haven't. The math is there, but the narrative just does a disservice to the math. And there isn't that. Nobody's come up with a narrative that explains the Higgs boson to a person who can't do the math, and that's most of us. I can't do the math for that.
Right. So Joel, I'm actually saying you're one of the few that has the courage to actually speak up, and I admire that. I really am leaning into it. But I also ask that these ideas that you have be expressed in ways that I can understand. That may be asking too much, but that's just where I'm going with this.
Okay. On that, it's not always easy for me to do that.
Which is completely okay. But let's continue with this, right?
Having not interacted with academia in the normal way, and having not interacted with the world in the normal way, I don't actually know what normal is. And I keep finding out the normal is, I don't even know how to describe it, but completely far from what I thought it was. Like, so far from what I thought it was that I'm utterly perplexed at how the world can continue to work and sustain itself at times.
You may not believe it, but I feel the same way.
So here's just a quick sentence that's been posted that it's demonstrating of itself being hypocritical. Science is the father of knowledge, but opinion breeds ignorance. Well, that's an opinion, because science isn't the father of knowledge. It's an opinion that science is the father of knowledge. So that in itself is an opinion that's breeding ignorance.
Are you saying I posted that?
It doesn't matter who posted it.
Actually, it kind of does.
But it is demonstrative of memes that are hypocritical and go against themselves. It's opinions that are being claimed to be rational and knowledge and evidence-based, which have no evidence and no real rationality. It's just statements that make people feel better and make them feel that they are the rational and right ones. But it's not true. In exactly the same way that the religious believers say things that pander to their way of feeling. And I do quotation mark the two words together, the religious believers and science believers. They're terms I used as a sort of word equation to connect to a greater idea than just someone who understands and knows science and someone who understands and knows religion, to the science believers, religion believers.
I just brought up from 2015 a very short post, half a dozen sentences. This is on Facebook, and I'll put a link to, I'll put a CC to it. This is entitled "A Worthless Opinion About Opinions." I don't give a fuck about opinions. In my worthless opinion, opinions are doo-doo, utterly devoid of reliable scientific content or functional value. What I do give a fuck about is a popular antisocial practice which makes so many people blithely adopt, model, and reify such that others mindlessly imitate the same atrociously antisocial practice. The mindless antisocial practice that I utterly abhor is the unscientific, unethical, and unbecoming practice of constructing and publishing haphazard theories of mind and character models of nameable individuals, and then acting as if those unscientifically constructed models were the ground truth certified and blessed by some omniscient supreme being. To my mind, That's an utterly abhorrent and atrocious practice. And I urge my correspondents not to adopt, model, or reify that toxic practice, full stop. That's my worthless opinion about opinions. I'll CC you on that if you want to make, go and make some fun of it. But
I agree. I share your opinion.
That could be evidentially shown how statements said by authority figures in academic science have never had evidence, and yet because they are considered experts and authority figures, their followers have repeated it so much that lots of people believe it to be truth. And that can be proven by showing causal effect of history and where the origin stating of that idea came from.
You can see that pattern even more easily with children and their parents.
Mm-hmm. My mum said it's true, so it's true.
oh, yeah.
I'm laughing. I remember having an argument, and some mother was driving us in the car. I don't know, it was probably in 4th grade. And I remember saying that there was salt in ice cream. And the girl was like arguing. She was like, "Ma, is there salt in ice cream?" And her mother said, "That's ridiculous." I don't know, that just reminded me of, one of those silly memories that you keep in your mind.
Oh, she's never going to enjoy salted caramel ice cream then. Yum.
Just before we move away, I just do have a question. I wanted to know if Joel had any comments on Barry's half spin statements.
This model of what does spin 1/2 mean geometrically? Is this dynamic spatial model anywhere close to revealing what the term spin 1/2 means, or is it just total fantasy fabrication?
I'm not always au fait on the precise academic terms. I'm better at visualizing the geometries of interaction. So even when I study what has been said by academic science, I lose the terms quite often. And so I forget what it precisely means. But there is relationships where you would have the flow of energy going around in a toroidal shape with its progressions and different things changing. Yeah. So if you are talking on that thing, then yeah, that would make sense, because that is how the flows of energy are moving.
When
I was just going to say, I have no math knowledge, but when you say that, intuitively that made sense, and that's why I wanted to hear Joel's opinion, who does have more of an understanding.
So you could also have, it could also relate to like the spin, you could have a similar relationship named that according to the spin of an atom, its precession, and that relative to that atom be experiencing different thermal waves or being in different densities, because the density changes the time progression, and the different density changes the size of the shape of the atom relative to the size it was at a different density or at a different thermal level. That kind of spin 1/2, I can't even remember exactly what you said, the precession of spin 1/2 could be related to a number of those different relationships.
I'll tell you where it comes from. Feynman mentioned when he was maybe a grad student at Cornell in the cafeteria, they would spin plates in the air like a Frisbee. And this fascinated Feynman, and he noticed that when you spin a plate in the air like a Frisbee, it'll wobble. And he noticed that for every 2 rotations of the spin of the plate, physical spin, it would wobble once. So the wobble frequency was half the rotational spin rate. And so what I did is I sort of took the same idea, except that I did it in 3. So I added not just precession, but also nutation, which is the wobble. And I said the ratio of these, oscillations, the the precession frequency and the nutation frequency, yeah, they can be in a ratio 1 to 2. Why not? And that actually makes some kind of sense that maybe that's the correct model, or maybe it's mathematically equivalent model, if not the correct model, that you can use it to visualize. Because getting a geometric interpretation is extremely valuable. When I was at Bell Labs, and more than once, not just at Bell Labs, I would have a model in mind, and it's a mathematical model, but I couldn't articulate it to a way that anybody around me other than another mathematician could understand. But I had a tool available to me in those days. I could do computer animations. Now, it would take a month, literally a month, for me to do a computer animation, but I could mathematical model and give it to the computer, and then have the computer do an animation of this model so you could see the dynamics in color on the screen. And when I did that, my manager says, now I understand. So being able to translate a pure mathematical model into a visible demonstration, either in sound or image, that varies in time, so you can either hear it or see it. And if you did that well, you could convey the idea. But narratives, no way would the narratives ever have sufficed. The narratives just didn't work. And of course, the mathematical expressions, they just look like, like a foreign language on the paper to anybody who couldn't visualize what the mathematics was saying.
Especially when you get into pages of equations that are effectively one giant equation.
Exactly. And nobody can parse that. And certainly, even if they can, the likelihood of parsing without error is nil to non-existent. It takes decades sometimes to prove a theorem, which everybody believes is true, but can't prove and the proof turns out to be so voluminous that it takes a computer to check the proof to make sure there's no mistakes in it.
So who was it that posted that our brains was working in 11 dimensions? Wasn't it you?
Well, I may have posted a link to it. But was it today or yesterday or farther back in the past?
I think maybe it was the last time we spoke.
Yeah, the article's been, the last year or two that came out, which I thought was coincidental because I believe, string theory also posits that there are 11 dimensions to the universe.
Yeah, 11 dimensions is one of the more popular versions. But string theory, again, the mathematics is so far down the line that very few people can wrap their brain around the math.
Here's a very interesting point on that. If each individual being is thinking in 11 dimensions and each individual being is a different dimension in themselves, how many more dimensions is there just within the human race? 8 billion times 11.
Well, Stacey's seen this. I wrote a character model for a storybook character, which is an approximation to a human being, just a simple storybook character. And it was called the onion layer, because she went from the innermost emotions to the outermost behaviors. And I think it was 11 dimensions or 11 layers to the onion or something, 10 or 11 layers. And that's just for a basic, simplest possible comprehensive model of a storybook character. And by the way, if you choose your 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 storybook characters judiciously, you get a soap opera. Because each one reacts to all the gestures and sayings of all the others, and you get kind of a multi-dimensional ping pong game that has continuity. That's the whole point of story. It can't just die. So there's a very nice geometric model, which is also an abstract model. And I love models, but I think I have a very small audience of people who find models that intriguing and fascinating.
Everybody uses models.
Well, except people who don't believe in them, which there are a few.
They do, they just don't understand it.
Yeah.
So I appreciate models that have leeway within them, sort of like freedom within the boundaries, that whole concept.
Yeah. I mean, models, to my mind, models have 3 useful properties. They have explanatory power, they have predictive power, and they have diagnostic power. And if a model doesn't have explanatory power, predictive power, and diagnostic power, then it's just not a model that reaches the minimum criteria that I'm looking for in a model.
Now, here's an interesting point. What about inspirational power?
Yeah. And in fact, that kind of comes out of diagnostic power, because if you have diagnostic power, you can get some insight into what's wrong with the system that's not conforming to the prediction of the model, and you can find and fix the flaw. This is like car talk, the diagnostic reasoning about automobiles is that if you have a good model, you can use it to diagnose what's wrong with the real system and fix it. And so that's the inspiration. You go, I know what's wrong and I know how to fix it. And then you can make people happy. And in the Fix It shop where I volunteer, often I can diagnose something, pretty simple household appliances, they're not very complicated, but I can diagnose it and fix it in a jiff and make somebody very happy. But if I didn't have that model of how this thing is supposed to work, I wouldn't be able to diagnose it. I wouldn't know what to fix.
That's fine, but not when it applies to people, because like a carburetor is not going to lie about why it's not working.
And that's why this theory of mind stuff is so problematic. Because if you try to figure out what's the bug in somebody's mental illness, good fucking luck, for an amateur on the internet figuring out, and even if you can correctly diagnose it, that doesn't mean you can cure it. I mean, even a surgeon can't always cure a correct diagnosis, because it's beyond the power, or you don't get the cooperation of the client. A person can have a mental illness and maybe go to a psychologist who can even diagnose the mental illness, but without cooperation, there's no treatment. You can't treat somebody and cure them without their cooperation. So they can walk away with the diagnosis and say, well, even if it's right, I don't want to deal with it. I just want to deal with it. Yeah.
Or a person can have symptoms of a mental illness that are from some other place that have nothing to do with the mental illness.
Yeah, misdiagnosis. Misdiagnosis is much more common than accurate diagnosis. And we could probably all give examples of misdiagnosis, maybe not so much with people or perhaps some medical things, but diagnosing an automobile incorrectly and then paying somebody to fix something that didn't fix it because they misdiagnosed it. I mean, I certainly had that. I spent $700 paying for a corrective measure that didn't fix the problem because it was misdiagnosed. And the correct diagnosis could be fixed with $20 worth of antifreeze. So that really was annoying.
Especially in psychology, a lot of the ideas are based upon the conception that normal is right. And yet, if we pay attention to history, the morality of normal doesn't have that very good history. Yeah. And even the morality of academia, especially high-level elite academia and its psychological testing processes, again, it's a morality very, very wanting in many cases. So some of the psychological studies and experimentation are psychotic, and yet they had the nerve to judge other people as mentally disordered.
Yeah, normalizing foolishness is a feature of our culture. We have all this foolishness and it gets normalized.
Was it Operation Paperclip? No, that was the Nazi, taking on the Nazi scientists. There was another one that America did where they was using psychedelics on their own population. And then those people were trying to tell the psychologists that this was going on to them. And because the psychologists didn't believe them, they were insane and psychotic. But the truth was the psychologists didn't have a clue what they were talking about. The American government was doing scientific experiments on its own people, and they were driving people crazy.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the morality around a lot of things that goes on in science and normality is very delusional. And there's an important thing you can do with that word, is when you realize that delusional is away from light, knowledge, or understanding. Well, anybody that doesn't understand the true light natures, the working natures of existence, is actually the delusional people. They're the people who don't understand the truth of how things work, so they're delusional.
Yeah.
And that comes from the use of understanding the prefix meaning, the meaning of the mid, which is lumin, and shun, which is often related to knowledge or understanding.
I mean, one of my hobby horses is the issue of dealing with misconceptions, because there are so many bloody misconceptions afloat in our culture. And maybe it's a misconception to think that you can even address them and resolve them. Maybe if you're lucky, one or two in a lifetime, that one person can fix. But this whole issue of operating under misconceptions and then deriving inappropriate or maladaptive practices that descend from a misconception. If the misconception were correct, were not a misconception, then what you're doing would make sense. But because you're working from misconception, you're deriving practices which are ill-conceived and ill-advised. Sam?
Within that, we've got the practice of democracy and the practice of agreeing to be right en masse, which the sciences have shown that many people agree to the wrong idea just so they don't fall out of the group.
Yep.
And we also have proven that most people don't have enough knowledge to agree to the right ideas.
Yep.
We've also shown Dunning-Kruger, which shows that the majority don't have enough awareness of their own awareness to be able to do that, which comes back to delusional.
Yep.
So all of our ideas surrounding that the majority can agree the minority are the bad guys and wrong is all wrong.
Yep.
The science itself says that, and yet we keep going back to those ideas that the majority can agree the minority are wrong. Or the majority can even judge whether the minority are wrong or right or moral, etc. Because the majority will always agree that they're the right and moral ones, and that what they've agreed is right because they agree it's right. Which is a really depressing thing to realize.
Are you saying that's a critique of science?
In a sense, it's a congratulations to the ones that did good science.
Actually, that's more just the more recent manifestation of might makes right. More of us can beat up fewer of you. That's basically all it amounts to. So that's the basic, tenet of democracy, which I've decried for many years. Democracy is the guaranteed way that good ideas never get implemented.
Correct.
Guaranteed.
One little place of sanity, which I attend to on a daily basis, is a YouTube channel that I've mentioned before. It's called Cracking the Cryptic. And it's two very good puzzle solvers who every day solve a couple of very hard puzzles. And these puzzles all are known to have a unique answer. So they know in advance that there's exactly one correct answer, but they don't guess. What they do, they use very precision logic. They work their way through the solution by using precision logic, step by step by step, and they explain the logic. And of course, there are places where they make a wrong hypothesis and then rule it out. So they're always falsifying what would have turned out to be the wrong answer as efficiently as possible. And what I appreciate is that the logic is extremely technical and beyond my ken. Some of the logic they use is so astonishingly insightful and brilliant, but I never would have guessed it. And people who attend this channel, a lot of them say, that was just brilliant. They would take days or weeks to solve it if they solved it at all. And these guys routinely solve them in less than an hour on a daily basis. But that demonstrates how hard it is to do precision analytical reasoning and logic and to systematically rule out the erroneous possibilities. And the fact that they arrive at the correct solution and it's demonstrably correct, that's the proof that they're doing good logic. Sam?
I want to go back to a request that Joel made, which is to remove these posts. One of Doug Engelbart's principles was nothing gets deleted. And the reason he said that is there's reason to know why you thought something at a certain time and that you now have evolved away from it. And if you remove that from the historical record, then that whole evolution is no longer there for anyone else to share or see
I can agree with
and
that.
understand.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
So I'm perfectly fine being shown, that I'm wrong at any point in time, and I'm trying to actually understand and improve my understanding. So I lay it all out there. Okay, I do lay it all out there. Okay.
I have to reword what I just said based upon my own sort of standpoint. Is I will recognize the truth in that. I don't need to agree with it for it to actually be correct, because it is correct. If you remove that from the historic record, you don't have it. So I don't need to agree. I'm recognizing its truth.
Yeah. Epistemology.
Yeah, truth doesn't need agreement. Is basically what you're saying, and I agree with that.
To go back to the idea of questioning, it would be interesting to have on that post if somebody would have said, is there one sentence, or which sentence would you change? Is there one sentence you would pull out to fix this meme? Because I get memes all the time where I agree with most of it, but there's always one sentence and I'm like, I can't share that because I don't agree.
Yeah. But you can adapt it, amend it, modify it, and from time to time, I'll find something that has the germ of comprehensive truth in it, but maybe there's a little piece that's problematic, and if I can, I'll amend it. If I can figure out how to fix it so that it's correct. It's the same old thing about diagnosis. The machine almost works except for one little glitch. Fix the glitch, now the machine works perfectly.
I mean, a common thing I do is a lot of these old expressions are formed in terms of he and him, right? So I will often adjust that.
Yeah.
Not everybody knows how to do that.
Oh, yeah.
So, and they're not
nor
going
does
to
everybody agree with pronoun ideology, and nor does every culture actually use pronouns. So this whole new ideology of you must use our pronouns, it's yet another ideology forcing its will.
Agreed.
So I take the same stand that other people have taken is no. You instantly try to force me to use that language and I'm not going to use it.
It creates
I
a
will
drama.
refer to you
Protagonist,
as
antagonist.
according to what I consider the use according to biology, which is him and her, referring to woman as in having a womb, and man as in being a P-man having a penis. He and her. That's my cultural use of those terms, and I don't see an emotional reaction as having right to force me away from using that way of language. I will call you Stacy if you are a effeminate man and you want to be called Stacy or Sarah or any other thing. And if any masculine woman wants to be called by a masculine name, I will call them that. But I won't be forced into using a completely different form of language use of pronouns than what fits my understanding of their use. Happy to use any name anybody wants to be called, even Starlight or Bubble Kiss. If they want to be called that, then that's fine, because that's just an abstract name. Anybody can be named anything. But pronouns are based upon many different things in many different cultures, and
so
you just can't force harmony.
So I want to share an example of something that happened to me, because I think it illustrates where the notion of power fits in. I had been in a call where there's one particular person, and in describing the group, when this person spoke of the females in the room, they called them girls, but the men were referred to as men. So I took note of it. I didn't have a charged response, but I definitely took note of it because it signifies something. Wasn't putting a judgment. And then on other occasions, I heard this person use the word properly, woman or females. So again, no need to say anything. But recently I was in another call and this person was leading an experiment. And so this time when it was used, I spoke up. And I explained later, the reason I did it is that when it was just an average individual speaking, I didn't feel the need to criticize or, point that out. But now that this was going to become somebody who was setting a standard that was then going to be used by the other people in the group, I had to weigh the different values that I hold. And I decided that it was more important to speak it out because it would have other implications. So, and it was difficult because it's not easy to correct somebody that you see as a leader, or at least in that moment is the authority of the group. So I just want to point that out.
How was that received?
Most of yes,
beautifully, because I only deal with reasonable people. So
most of the people who I hear use girls also call men boys.
That would be totally different.
I see that as that being separated.
I've never seen that, actually. I have never, ever been in that situation. Never. Because if somebody said, if Barry was working for somebody and they said, I'm going to send my boy Barry down, I think, I don't know, I don't want to speak for you. Sam, if somebody said, I'm going to send my boy Sam down, I'm thinking you wouldn't really love that.
This is a reminder.
Whereas
Yes.
it's not, some women actually, I've heard that, I mean, I have no problem saying I'm going out for girls' night. It's a very different kind of thing. But yeah, I'm not even going to get into it because it means different things to different people. However, as far as I'm concerned, if it's a professional environment or an academic environment, it's really important. Girl is not the proper term for someone who's 35, 40, 50 years old. And I think that in an academic environment, we should use the proper terms.
But what if I said to you, I don't recognize the ideology of professionalism, and I consider it a really negative way of looking at how things are? You should be seeing people as people and them as being human, not trying to elevate them.
Right, but so I would wonder why somebody is looking at a member of the male species as being fully mature and labeling them with a word that indicates maturity, and yet they'd be looking at the female and labeling her in a way that indicates a lower level of maturity.
As I said, from the people I've heard use those, it's always been balanced. It would be more common that they would say boys when it is the entire group of being boys. But
yeah, I'm shocked because I've never, I'm curious about Barry and Sam. I don't.
I know quite a lot of people who they have their runaround people who they're like the leader, and they have all their people that work around them and do all their sort of running around, all their chores, and they say, I'm going to send my boy down. I've got my boy coming to you. And I've also heard, I use guys in a general neutral way to mean people.
Yeah, I do as well.
So the whole idea that people can just react and go, no, you've got to use it the way I say.
But you don't see that there's something going on in the power dynamic when that person says, I'm going to send one of my boys down? Is he considering himself a boy?
It's just the way it is. It's just the use of language.
Well,
Why does it have to be taken to that power dynamic ideology?
It doesn't have to be, but there's a very good chance that there are underlying assumptions there. And to pretend they're not is silly.
He's right, because he's the leader and all of those people have accepted him as the leader.
So you've
accepted
is the person that
who organizes and controls what goes on.
So you've accepted that a leader should be all powerful.
He's not all powerful, it's just the culture in that group. And if that group decided that that leader was no longer working in their interests, then they would have the power to get rid of their leader and stop working for them. Which is what happens in a lot of things around here. I mean, especially in criminal gangs, they call them boys. And when the leader loses touch with looking after the whole group as a whole, That leader doesn't have his gang very long. They disappear off and find other people to work for if they don't have the capacity to be doing that work themselves, which is often the case. Some people don't want that leadership role. They would rather have someone who makes the decisions and they just accept their position as taking part of the pie. And often I question, if I want to run a business, do I really want that stress and strain of leading the business, controlling the paperwork, organizing everybody, or would I rather just let that go to someone else who's probably a bit better than me at it, and just sit there going, thank you for organizing all this work, thank you for my pay, I'm going to go enjoy myself without the stresses.
Yeah, I think you're ignoring the fact that the words we choose are indicative of underlying assumptions that we make.
And mental models.
Yeah.
But that's also very cultural based and very individual based. So to just assume that your perspective of that perspective is the right one is a perspective.
Well, I'm open to the fact that
all Stacy is saying is, in any language, the choice of certain terms and words reveals something, maybe not all, but something about the mental model that that person is speaking from. That's all she's saying.
Yeah, and that could be very different things. I'm not even saying what it reveals, but it reveals something. And where I would agree is if it's somebody's second language, then that may not hold to be true because there's issues with translation. But yes.
And acculturation.
Yeah.
Like, I don't have a lot of idioms simply because in my early childhood, I didn't grow up in this country.
And further than that, Hungarian is a gender neutral language, so they don't have pronouns at all.
Raising hackles is very idiosyncratic. I can say something that other people will just shrug, other person will raise their hackles. And if you don't know the person very well, you'll have no ability to anticipate who's going to get their hackles raised. Now, if you spend enough time with people, you learn, you sort of figure it out empirically from lots of evidence, lots of examples. But
the interesting thing, it's never the people in authority that come to these realizations. It's the people who have been affected by these things that notice them.
Yeah. The way our emotions work is we have an idea about something. And because we have an idea about something, it triggers the emotional reaction. So those who are being affected by it are the ones that have the idea about it being that way. And the ones who don't get affected by it are the ones who don't have the idea of it being that way.
True, but it's very possible.
Ideology.
That is true. However, sometimes the reason they have the idea about it has to do with their experiences and then making that connection. I never personally made that connection when I was a young girl. I didn't have any experience to make it. Go ahead, Sam.
And flip side, agreeing with you, is the people who often do not have that trigger or reaction to it are the people who are benefiting from that oppression.
Right.
I was once talking to a psychologist about this issue of raising hackles, and he contributed a suggestion that if you have to say it out loud, he said, use the phrase, I take exception to, ... And, one of the things I noticed watching the original Star Trek movies on TV, or the episodes on TV, two of the characters, Bones and Spock, had, being actors, a way of raising one eyebrow in a close-up to show skepticism. It turns out I cannot raise one eyebrow. I simply don't have the ability to. I can raise both eyebrows, but not one. And that sort of reminds me of a paraphrase of Wittgenstein. That which cannot be spoken of in words must be passed over by making funny faces. I wish I could make funny faces as good as actors do who can raise one eyebrow to silently express, skepticism or disapproval. Joel, I don't think, Joel's trying to raise one eyebrow and he's not successfully doing it. So probably has the same genealogical issues as I do, that inability to visibly raise one eyebrow like Spock or Bones could do.
Some people can.
There's a lot of things I wish I
scalp.
could express disapproval of non-verbally with funny faces, but just it's not within my acting ability.
So we're nearing the top of the hour.
Joel, I'm going to watch those 4 videos. The last 3 weeks have been my first 2 or 3 weeks in a brand new set of assignments. So my day gig is actually taking up more of my time and energy and attention. So it's an explanation, not an excuse. Channels. What?
I think I shared channels, which there's hundreds on those channels.
Well, there are specific individuals associated with those channels. So I'll follow up on those individuals and some of their postings.
What's his name? Dr. Justin something.
Yeah.
Very good Jewish scholar. Massive library. Very jealous of his reading capabilities. I'd love to be able to just go through his library and be able to read the languages he can read. Read archaic languages. I wish I had the education for that. But unfortunately,
never too late,
I had
right?
a terrible private school education and basically didn't have one. When I went to school, first school didn't discover I was dyslexic and just called me stupid and didn't bother teaching me. The second one figured out I was dyslexic and gave me a little bit extra support. And at the age of 10, I started to learn to read and write properly. The first secondary school I went to, which is high school, they didn't help my at all. And then the local council decided to close that school down, which meant I had to be moved schools. And then in the next school I had the collection of bullies from multiple different schools all bullying me. So in year 9, we take tests to see what groups you're going to go in. And year 8, I worked myself up from the bottom groups to the top. But missing the year 9 tests, they put me back in the bottom groups again. And so I kind of gave up. So my primary school and high school education is virtually meaningless. I didn't come out with anything. And then I skipped doing the A levels to do my bachelor's degree. So what would you call that? Intermediate college? What's between?
Bachelor's degree is 4 years of college in the U.S.
2 years, I think they call an associate's degree. Is that still the
2
case?
years associate's degree, yes.
So between high school and what university you do an associate's degree?
In the U.S., it's called
not everyone. Some people just go directly into that 4-year program.
Okay. Do you have sixth form or what? Which is another 2 years after high school attached to high school?
No, after 12th grade, there's 4 years of college. If you do a community college, you would do your first 2. And then if you want to continue on for your bachelor's, then you transfer to finish the 4.
Right.
So our last year when I was at school was 11th.
Yeah, we have 12. We have 12.
Yeah. If you can't get into a 4-year college after finishing high school, you can go into a community college or a junior college and get 2 years, an associate's degree. And if you do well enough, then you can typically get to the last 2 years of a 4-year college. If you do really well in high school, then you go straight to a 4-year college.
I have to say that's really changed now because of the economy. Many people are choosing to go to community colleges also because they're much better than they were.
And they're a lot cheaper. That's the main
And
reason.
a lot cheaper.
And now some of them are starting to get funded by the state.
Yeah. 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 When I went to college, the tuition was $102 a semester for in-state residents.
currently
you get a scholarship, it was only worth $102 a semester, so like big deal.
I think the courses for the masters I'm doing is what would be equivalent of about $3,000 per 8 months.
That's cheap.
That's that distance learning, so that's not even going into the university.
I know. Unfortunately, it's still cheap.
First, today you can get a pretty good education if you're disciplined just on the internet, if you know what to look for and are disciplined, which most people aren't, but you can get a good education.
I mean, yes. A lot of stuff is available.
Yeah, you can also get exposed to a lot of crap.
That's true in academia too.
Yeah,
to be wrong is a very common practice. As we were talking earlier, all of the agreed psychology, which is agreed by some of the best institutions around the world with the most intelligent people, supposedly, and yet they all agreed to this really disgusting and immoral behaviors as being good science.
So I have a question. Can't we say that almost about every domain? Let's say, there's woodworkers. There's a bell curve potentially to the skill level of various woodworkers, right? Most of them will probably have a semi-competent level. And then you get the extremes on both ends. You get the, P-tail 5% on, absolute incompetence. And you get the P-tail on the other side, which is, the super experts. So if you apply that to teaching, government, lawyering, sciencing, wouldn't we see the same behavior?
Pretty much.
Yes.
So if we're decrying any particular field just based on the bell curve, then we're just arguing for argument's sake, it seems to me, if you understand this.
I would more point to we're trying to arrive at the recognition that agreeing to be right en masse and seeing the majorities as being the right ones is actually inaccurate, and we need to figure out
I've dropped that thought decades ago.
That's the whole point, that people really, we always used to have it. You don't talk upon things that you don't have at least some expertise in. And yet quite a lot of people talk about things they don't have expertise in. Not even
according to other people, belief. Yes.
No, because you can
Most of us would agree. We can prove that, I think.
You can show that somebody doesn't have a bit of knowledge. And by showing they don't have that bit of knowledge that is required to judge something, well, they're not expertise enough to judge the thing they're judging.
Unfortunately, a lot of people, if you quote, show them, don't see what you show them, don't buy the criticism and go on doing what they're doing and think that you're simply, the critic is simply incompetent. That's such a commonplace phenomenon. And that's, I think, why people write stories. They write stories and parables and allegories instead of directly criticizing. They'll do a send-up, a satire, or a parody, or an allegory, or some other kind of indirect way of getting the story across without directly challenging somebody. And that's a challenging thing to do. I've done it a few times. I'm not very good at it, and it's hard to do, and it takes a lot of literary creativity, which is sort of pushing my limits.
A lot of the scientific sort of perception around that is we do comedy, and lots of people agree with it from the comedic position because it makes them feel better, because laughing is a self-defense mechanism in that situation. So they're agreeing with each other that perspective is right, and then creating an emotional response to that produces the sensations that they see as positive to reinforce the sort of perception and belief. So you see it a lot with comedy. People mock things thinking that it's the thought behind it is rational. Often it demonstrates they didn't know, and it was more comfortable to be laughing at that thing thinking it's wrong and irrational, whilst the actual behavior was the irrational part.
A lot of good literature, though, is comedic, Sam.
And a lot of good political satire today is actually on target.
Yeah.
I actually find, that much of what the journalists, what is expected to be a journalism profession, doesn't even claim they're trying to give us, objective facts anymore. They don't.
Yeah.
They don't have standards that they are held to anymore.
Yeah.
And so you find some of these quote unquote comics actually, able to actually speak on the matters that truly need to be spoken.
Yeah.
Because the journalists are not doing it.
Stephen Colbert.
That doesn't mean they're always right, but it does mean that they're actually taking on these topics that journalism doesn't take on.
Yep.
Well, and the other thing is, if you couldn't find truth in it, it wouldn't be funny to you.
Yeah, the grain of truth, and you do the exaggeration, and the exaggeration is a send up, but there's a grain of truth in it. Yeah.
Not only that, I don't think of a single comic that's successfully been able to exaggerate, the stuff that's been reported on Trump. It's impossible to exaggerate what this guy does.
He's already over the top.
Exactly.
Or under the bottom, maybe I should say.
Well, I remember in his first year, a lot of the Saturday Night Live openings were actually his exact words.
Exactly. That's right.
Right.
A very good evil genius would make everybody think they're a buffoon.
What?
A very good evil genius would make everybody think they're a buffoon and a fool.
But Joel, I think there's, again, some truth to that. The puppet master behind Trump is a genius. Trump himself is not.
Look at the villains in Batman, the Joker, the Penguin, the Riddler. I mean, the bad guys, the evil bad guys are all comic characters in Batman. I mean, that's certainly not an accident that they're all comic figures.
Even in mythology, you have the fool, and the fool is the one who tries to point to everybody that what they're doing in culture isn't the right way to behave, that their morality's gone skew, or that their culture's gone skew.
Yeah, George Carlin, for example.
Yeah, I was just thinking about him. He was a fabulous, entertaining comic, but he was really doing social criticism.
Exactly.
It was very clear that he was criticizing our culture and the audience. He was telling us how stupid we were to go along with these idiotic practices in our culture. And then people were laughing and being entertained and paying good money to sit in the audience. But he was a rare breed, or maybe if you're lucky, you can find a dozen people of that caliber over your lifetime.
Who else? Jon Stewart, maybe?
Yeah, Jon Stewart and Stephen Colbert and, some of these other people on the late night talk shows are in that caliber. They do their monologues, which are doing send-ups of public figures. And of course, the political cartoonists in the newspapers for years, the political cartoonists were doing that.
So I'll make a claim. Joel, I'm not going to pester you again on any of these questions unless I watch at least one of your videos that you posted, okay? I'll do at least one.
At least one. A topic that spans hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years with millions and millions of scholars.
Same could be said of science.
As I keep trying to point, they are both science, but from different perceptual frameworks at times.
Yep, and I'm willing to consider that.
I mean, from evolution, we know that behavior has cause and effect on evolution. So what if some of these rules from religions that people mock and make jokes about actually are an understanding that those behaviors over centuries or thousands of years eventually leads us to a very negative evolutionary standpoint, perhaps one that is destructive to culture as a whole?
I mean, heck, let's take all of evangelical Christianity in that context.
But I do often say that we need within those traditions, we need to pay attention to the true and the false, the accurate and the distorted, which is difficult if you don't understand the originating ideas they are supposed to connect to. In fact, I'd say almost impossible, because people will just go, well, it's just a matter of opinion. But if we are saying that it does connect back to a scientific understanding that was demonstrationable, even if the evidence has been lost, well, then the truth of those things would lead back to the truth as we could find them again today. We could look to behaviors and culture and work out that they'd led to a bad position and go on, that's why that religion or that framework had that rule, to stop us getting here. But we ignored it thinking it was wrong, and so we got back here anyway.
On the other hand, I will always be looking with the following query, which is, what is better explained in system B than in system A, if I might use my previous depictions of A and B? That would be my question.
We could slightly reword that and say, what different perspective does each one give? They don't necessarily have to be better, but they could sort of suggest something from a nature of being. So let's say that you was an evolution of a dog and had the same sort of rule set as an evolution of a cat. Well, you don't want to be the same evolutions. You want to act and think differently. So if you could say that one nature of being has looked at this scenario from this perspective, and that nature of being has looked at that scenario from a different perspective and want different ends.
Okay, let me consider that also. My going in presumption, and I'm just stating it is a presumption, is that each system of thought should be able, this is my own opinion, okay, so therefore it's worthless, should be able to explain the explanation of the other in its own terms. That's what I'm looking for.
Why?
It's an idea of completeness. It's an idea of the powers that Barry was talking about before, whether it's diagnosing, whether it's explaining, whether it's predicting, whether it's inspiring. That's what I'm looking for. Because if you then can do so, you can unify those schools of thought, which to me is valuable.
Yeah.
But it's leaving out the possibility that there's a whole nother third.
No, it's not.
Well, when you say completeness, you said you're looking for completeness. Maybe those two will not provide completeness.
That's possible.
I'll give you an example. When I was at the lowest point in one of the most problematic phases of my life about 40 years ago, what came to mind was a passage that I had learned from the Old Testament. And superficially, it sounds like a logical argument, except that it leaves out the intervening part of the argument, which is the rationale. And the passage goes like this: I set before you life and death, blessing and curse. Therefore, choose life. It left out, didn't give a reason. Therefore, choose life. I set before you life and death, blessing and curse. Therefore, choose life. And that got me out of the funk I was in. I chose life. It convinced me, even though it wasn't no rational reason. And technically, that's religion because it was in the Old Testament. It wasn't even analytic theology. And by the way, that passage is attributed to a storybook character called the deity of the Old Testament. That's the supposed author of that is the deity.
And life is growth.
You know, I decided not to cash it, but yeah.
What?
Can be.
Well, can you name something living that's not growing?
Yeah, something that's dying.
Yeah.
And also name something that is decaying.
But I'm thinking that Okay, so maybe I'm
Bacteria's-
using I'm using the word growth wrong, and I should use the word movement, because that's how I really meant it. Change in some way.
Yeah, things
So
can
that's
be
the old
changing
spirit.
and improving or not improving, getting worse.
That was the old spiritual concept of life, was flow, energy flow.
Right, that's what I meant.
Right. And think about it, you know, spirit is literally refers to breath, and breath is the oxygen, which is the other half of the fuel to generate energy. You know, you can eat all the food you want, but if you don't breathe in some oxygen, you cannot oxidize that food and generate energy to run your body. So literally, spirit is the Greek word for breath. Inspire, expire,
Perspire.
aspire.
Joel, thank you again. I have another session to prepare for.
Okay.
So I'll let you guys go.
All right. I think we're done, aren't we? Does anybody else have
How
more?
me and Barry don't get a thank you? What do we, chop liver?
Thank you both.
All right, goodbye, everybody. Have a good weekend.
Bye-bye.